And we're live. I'm joined today with Loudmouth Reviews and Humane Mind. We are going to be talking about rights and what rights are. I don't remember exactly how. I know it was between. I know Humane proposed the idea, but I don't know how. I don't know what got the topic up to the front of the
Of the
line here.
queue.
But what?
Yeah, the front of the queue, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's gonna be the basis of the stream. Um, if Humane, if you want to go first with your thoughts about rights and what they are, you can go ahead.
All right. And so, did you introduce Loudmouth? Yeah, but so we did
Yeah,
start this. So I started on my end as well, and then and we were joined with Loudmouth, and so the I don't remember what exactly brought this issue up either because I proposed this 2 weeks ago, and then it kind of got it kind of got pushed out of the way for last week's stream where we were talking about icons with DarkCon and my 2 cents.
yeah.
And that topic we just kind of went all over the place on that one,
Oh yeah,
but yeah. So one I do know I don't know the specifics of what spurred this idea, but I do know the conversation that or the Twitter I guess back and forth that I was in at the at the time was they were talking about abortion, and so I don't want to get into the topic of abortion here because I'm talking specifically about rights and responsibilities that come with them.
yeah,
So it's one thing that people you're like, oh hey, you've got your rights, and they talk about the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and things like that. But very few people talk about the responsibilities that come with rights, and
yes,
that's I was like, and that's what occurred to me during that conversation about abortion because the person I was arguing against was all about, oh well, what about the body, the body autonomy,
the
wow.
bodily autonomy,
Autonomy. Yeah, that's the word. Autonomy. Yeah.
bodily.
Bodily autonomy of the mother. And I was like, well, yeah, that's one thing to consider, but they also have a responsibility to their child. And then we started talking about the. Okay, so here's the situation I think is. I think this is more of the specific because now that I'm trying to recall the conversation. Because we started talking about after the child is born. And this person, for some reason, thinks that or a mother and a father, or just, I guess, maybe just a mother on their own, can give
Yeah,
birth to a child and then just abandon it. And then yeah, okay, so this is the specific issue that brought up this idea, is the mother didn't choose voluntarily to take care of that child, and this person was under the impression that a mother has to choose to take care of their own child. And I
hmm,
kept trying to drive this point home, and I'm like, okay, so a mother gives birth, and then doesn't find a parent or guardian, doesn't drop off the child at the designated areas, and just abandons the child. What happens? Nobody at this point has taken any responsibility for this child.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
and this person I was arguing with obviously kept avoiding that particular question. They were like, "Oh, well, you just drop it off at the designated area." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's taking some responsibility. If the mother just gives birth and then abandons the child at that point, they still have a responsibility to make sure that that child has a guardian who did say yes, who did volunteer."
hmm.
Right.
Um, I will say this: that I wholeheartedly agree with the rights. With when you get rights, you get responsibilities. You
Yes.
know, like you have the right to bear arms, but that also means you got to be careful. You got to be responsible.
Yeah.
I've been shooting guns since 2013, and ever since then, like even with toy guns, when I was little, I would remember my dad would drill this into my head. Whether it's real or fake, you always treat it as if it were loaded,
Yeah.
so it'd make a good habit. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you have the right to drink and smoke. You have the right to vote. All those things you got to be very careful with when you practice any of those. You know, um,
Well, so I'm with you on the other things being rights. The voting is not a right as when you voting is more of a privilege, and I guess maybe we need to define that distinction. The other
well,
thing
yeah,
is loudmouth. Are you? are you trying to say things because we can't hear you, but it seems like you're.
No,
Oh,
I've
so,
just been
yeah. So
listening.
I
Okay.
guess that's a little bit the feedback because I keep hearing
Yeah.
like little
Yeah, I
small
do.
audio.
You're roboting a little bit of
Oh,
feedback.
okay.
Robot.
I will say this though, because when I was presenting this essay to my class,
Hmm.
what I wanted to hammer home, what I wanted to put the exclamation point on is, and I use a lot of color coding for words like positive and negative rights. I pointed
Yeah.
out that in order to protect rights, in order to defend rights, as we were talking about the
Hmm.
Civil War and all these other things, um, you need to define what rights are. Some people
Yes.
think certain things are rights. Some people think that they are not. Some people argue that you have a right to health care, to food, water, to clean air. Some people do not believe that you have the right to own guns. You don't have the right to, like Humane said, vote. There's various examples of where people do argue whether or not certain things are rights or
Yeah.
not. And if you define what rights are, then you will be able to protect rights. You
Yeah,
know.
and that's what I
Oh,
think has happened over time is the line or the distinction of what rights actually are has been blurred beyond all
well, I see
recognition.
rights basically just as things that state or the government can't take away from you. Okay,
That's the
like freedom
yeah,
of speech, freedom of religion. All right, right to bear arms. All right, these are basically just saying, all right, just as freedom, well, right to bear arms doesn't mean the government has to go buy you a gun.
Yeah.
All right, and pay for it. No, you got to pay for it yourself. I also take the blanket idea of rights that you have a right to nothing you can't afford. All right, you have a right to what you can afford, but you do not have a right to the product of anyone else's labor. As a
yeah,
libertarian, that's the philosophy I've
Yeah.
always taken.
yeah, and you know, I've always seen it as it does get a little frustrating when like there's some areas where of course people are going to have different definitions, but to get a working one in order to secure things as rights, to try and define them. And this is a common definition because I asked everyone in that classroom, including the teacher, all right, what is your definition of what human rights are, just rights in general? And they would all say it's something like these type of rights to just secure the basic needs of of life. Like the teacher had a different answer. I can't remember what his was, but the students generally said that just like freedom and rights were things that would protect your ability to live freely, to not have the state crush you, and to do as long as you don't hurt other people, you know, then you're fine. Then no one should care as long as it doesn't hurt other people. And that was kind of took me aback as their definition was kind of similar to mine. I would kind of agree with it. Like and then there was like a fringe minority, I guess, who would say that anything
Yeah.
that can secure your ability to live would be a right.
Yeah. Well, and that particular definition is kind of what gets, over time can lead to people saying, "Oh, healthcare is a right." And you're like, "Well, it's because it's what I need in order to keep on living, and if I get, cancer or something like that, well then, I should be able to get the medical care I need in order to keep on living because that's protecting my right to life and things along those lines." And I'm like, that's why, like, while I understand the sentiment behind that definition, it does not seem to be consistent because it seems to be a very subjective definition. Because if you're talking about what it takes to survive, well, what it took to survive 100 years ago is not what it takes to survive right now. Because
Yeah,
And
you could have, yeah,
ultimately,
100 years ago you could have survived on your own land as long as you got a gun and a house, and you're fine living on your own. Try doing that in modern times. You have to have
it
a bank account, you have to have a driver's license.
right.
Yeah.
you have
But
to have a
ultimately,
job.
the right to live really is obviously not something that is natural because naturally life is taken from all of us eventually.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
So that's one distinction. Like you have a right to a long life, not according to nature. Nature really does exist on the principle of life being a very fleeting thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and,
Um,
and when it comes to healthcare, that's something that is often overlooked. And it's like, oh, they have a right to health care, and if you're denying health care, then you killed them. And I'm like, how? In what world does that make any sense whatsoever? The natural state is people live dying. Yeah, you're born with a death sentence on you. And so if
tragedy is kind of the natural part of the human condition.
Yeah, and
ultimately our existence is an incredibly tragic one because it is so fleeting.
Yeah, and it's
we could all.
I could have lived an extra 5 years if you hadn't done something, and since you didn't do anything, then you robbed me of 5 years. I'm like, I didn't do anything. That's nature. That was the natural course, was that you were going to die this time. The unnatural course of events is for us to extend your life by 5 years. That's the unnatural.
It's completely artificial, and it's funny because when I'd argue with people on healthcare, I'd bring up this point, and they'd get so upset with me I'd say, so basically saying no to someone is murder, or saying no to somebody is violating their rights, and I'd get some like absolutely like batshit insane responses, like
yes, that is the
incredibly
ultimate
angry.
That is the ultimate hypocrisy of the left on the matter. Is they will venomously support the principle that you have a right only to what you've earned on that matter, all right, on the right to someone's personal right to say no, of course. But on a societal level, they'll say, oh, but you have a right to have other people pay for this and that, but not for this and that. All right, it's very arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and throughout the whole discussion of what rights are, because when I was writing this paper, I wanted to look at like just a basic bitch definition of what rights are, just so I could at least get somewhere, so I could have somewhere to some type of framework, So if we went with just a Google definition, it says that which is morally correct, just, or honorable is from the noun number one. Number two would be a moral or legal. There's a little bit of sun glaring on me. A little legal or moral entitlement to have or obtain something or to act in a certain way. And then the verb is restore to a normal or upright position. That was it. And it was kind of interesting because I know some people are going to say that there's several subjective or vague or several gray areas within those
Ultimately,
those
it's all very subjective, and there are so many gray areas. That's why it's such an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it can be pretty philosophical to discuss like of rights, and because before I even really got heavily invested into the libertarian philosophy, I would notice, basically when people talk about rights, it was kind of shallow, but when I would start to listen to like ANCAPs or really libertarian people, they were one of the few people I'd start to hear say things like positive and negative rights. And I was like, positive and negative rights? Because at first it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. But then, as I gave it a little more thought, it made some sense, considering that, you've talked about it before, I think, HUMANe, where you're pointing out when rights come in conflict with one another. The abortion issue is where people point out rights coming in conflict all the time.
Because, the fundamental of that debate for me is whether the child is alive or not. Because if it's alive, then it has the right to life, and ending that life prematurely would be a violation. And that's where I'm saying that individual is an own separate entity. And yes, they are living inside of their mother's body, but that is the only place they can live at the moment. And that's it. It seems like a cruel punishment to bring someone into this world and then just, destroy them before they don't have any chance to do anything on their own other than grow for a few months or weeks. And so they
And another thing about that issue that always needs to be stated is one of the most frustrating things, particularly hearing the left about it, they'll talk about a woman getting pregnant as if it's something that just randomly happens to women. Like, as if it's like breast cancer. Like, oh, I just pulled a bad genetic heart. It just started growing on its own. No, it didn't, okay? You chose to have sex without a condom. Did you expect to plasma TV? You willfully decided to bring that child into this world.
Yeah.
And you made that choice.
Well, and even in the case where protection was used, and they still get pregnant, that still doesn't seem like a viable excuse. And like, well, you took the specific actions required to create a baby. There are an infinite number of things that you can physically do that will not result in a baby.
Right. Yeah, your mouth can't get pregnant, for example.
Yeah. And you chose to do the one action that is the only way to naturally produce a child.
Oh my god.
That's the one activity. Penis inside vagina, and,
nothing else will result in the child. It's impossible.
Yeah. I mean, well, the other thing would be, artificial insemination, but that's...
Yeah.
Okay.
But as far as, like, without going to that extent, because artificial insemination, you're going in with the direct goal of getting pregnant. And this is something that I think has been warped in the minds of people. It's like, well, okay, artificial insemination, they understand, is like, yeah, the person's trying to get pregnant. I'm like, penis and vagina, the person is trying to get pregnant. I don't care if they're like, oh, but I just want to feel good, and it's like, and like, do you not realize? Okay, so this is some point I keep bringing up. Sex is short for sexual reproduction, as opposed to asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction. We shorten it to the word sex, and I'm like, you guys forgot, like, the most important part of that is the reproduction. The entire purpose of penis and vagina is not, but it feels good, and it's, I just want to be happy, and we're just trying to be intimate. No. The entire purpose is to create a new human.
Yeah.
That is the main purpose of sex.
Yeah.
The main purpose of our genes in general, all right?
Oh, yeah.
Why did our genes create us? They want to make copies of themselves with the roundabout strategy of building a human that can create other copies of itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the idea that, we used protection and we still got pregnant. Okay, time to go to an abortion. And like, that doesn't work for me. And like,
but
even though you didn't intend for that to happen, it's not like it just magically happened and you got unlucky. It's like...
But what's really frustrating, though, even ignoring those, are the people who have sex totally unprotected and then get surprised that you got pregnant. What the fuck did you think was going to happen? That is the fucking point of it. All right, why didn't you use a condom? They cost $1.
Yeah. Well,
they're not expensive. And I keep hearing people on the left also talking about, well, we need to expand people's access to birth control. How the condoms are at every gas station.
Yeah.
They're at every
and they are cheap.
Stall, at every bar. All right. The only way to make condoms easier to get would be to find a way to make them rain from the sky.
If
I'm not mistaken, there's also over-the-counter birth control. So over-the-counter birth control, and it's like what, $1.60 a month or something stupid cheap.
It's not expensive at all.
I saw them selling condoms and things like that at a fucking Hot Topic for 50 cents.
Yeah, and actually in schools and stuff, they hand out condoms for free. Yeah, like if you go to a college campus.
If you're too poor to afford that, you're probably not going to be able to get laid anyway. So that's not.
Well, the other thing is if you're if you're too poor to afford, like 50 cents a month, or I guess maybe 50 cents per condom, I'm not quite sure, but I do know birth control is really cheap, less than $2 a month sort of thing.
They're cheap. You can buy them at a gas station.
Yeah,
I mean,
so you're
life. There are instances where you'll get an opportunity that you weren't really expecting, unless you didn't really have a condom on you. Like, I always try to keep like one condom in my wallet just in case, even though the chances of me encountering a chick willing to have sex with me in my day-to-day working life is very small, but I still, just in case, will have one.
Okay. Yeah, so really cheap. But the thing I want to point out is, okay, so let's say you aren't you aren't, I guess, wise enough with your money to do the birth control and all that sort of thing. And you can't afford that because that's too much of an expense. But you'll risk the possibility of creating a child and then either having to pay for the abortion or, raising the child. And you're like, you're really bad at math at that point. You're like,
It costs like $250,000 today to raise a kid in the United States.
Yeah.
Versus $1 for a condom, yes.
Yeah, and you're like,
One of my
some,
favorite condom ads is this kid flipping his shit out in this grocery store when he throws some candy in the cart. And his dad puts it back on the shelf, and the kid just goes nuts. And at the end it says, "Use condoms."
But
all right,
you know, but
Yeah.
but I also think that, you know, I did like the part where Humane mentioned responsibilities. You know,
Yeah.
they have to come with rights, because it makes you appreciate those rights, and it makes you understand that it's not something you should take lightly, whether it
Yeah.
be the freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, you know, whether or not you consider it the right to vote. If you do consider it a right to vote, it will make you understand you got to be careful with how you vote.
Well, one of the real problems with voting, though, is
Uh-oh.
Oof.
Yeah, I'm getting robot
Loudmouth,
voice
you're
from
breaking
ya.
up real. You're
Yeah.
breaking up really bad. Like, this is. I was gonna make a breakup joke about
Oh.
some celebrity. That's a little harsh.
No, like right now, you are
hear
the
me now?
Titanic at the last half an hour of the movie, right?
No, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Can you hear me now?
Well, I heard you up until you said now, and then it kind of trailed off.
Yeah. Where are you? I mean, don't tell us your location, but like, what are you doing? Like, why is it so bad, the connection?
He might be on his cell phone or something.
Well, I know he's on his phone, but
Oh, okay,
you
so
know,
yeah.
yeah, like the mic
Alright.
kind of gave it away.
Let's. Nope, still. All right. Well, hopefully you'll get a better connection. We'll come back to you.
Yeah, but
All right. Keep that
Yeah.
thought.
yeah. But it was interesting just to go over various
Yeah.
things that people consider big issues and talking about rights. Like it's like I mentioned earlier, it's very common to hear healthcare, clean water, food, housing. I know there's another one that would attach to that, but I can't think of it right now. But those type of things, they'll say are rights, and Loudmouth has left the building. But
Yeah.
you know, people will mention those things as rights, and they'll say, you know,
Okay, can
I
you
have
hear me
the-
now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. What were you gonna say, Loudmouth?
Okay, what the fuck was I gonna say?
Oh.
Voting and rights.
No. He was talking about. I
Well,
don't think.
back to the abortion issue. One of the main things, though, is I worry with how easy it is to avoid getting pregnant. I do worry that anyone who's stupid enough to get accidentally pregnant is really someone who should not be having kids.
Yeah.
That's kind of
No, I agree.
that's really the thing that where I would worry about anti-abortion laws. Even though abortions themselves, I think they are absolutely fucking repulsive as procedures.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
I think they're downright savage. But I also worry you really should not be having kids if you're that fucking stupid. All right, to get pregnant accidentally.
Yeah.
Because as we pointed out, it's extremely easy not to get pregnant.
Yes.
Yeah,
And-
I
but
can be a bit of an anti-natalist when it comes to dumb people having kids.
yeah, and so while I agree with you that those are likely to be terrible parents and raise monstrous kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but to me, it doesn't make sense to punish the child because of the stupidity of the parents, and that's what I see abortion is punishment of the victim or like the innocent party in this.
They will probably
Yeah. Okay, I guess we're slightly losing you again, but I'm gonna continue on with my point. So,
Yeah.
the mother and the father coming together is what creates the baby, and then so that even if the mother and the father didn't want, or even just the mother didn't want it. Oh, you're breaking up again, man.
Loudmouth, I don't know where you are, but if you can get yourself home, we can hear you.
They probably, I'm not. I wasn't talking.
Oh,
Okay, yeah, we were getting, I guess, a little bit of lag on that end. Okay,
it was extremely laggy,
yeah.
like this camera tends to be.
but so the
yeah.
mother and the father come together, they create a baby, and then either the mother or the father, or probably just the mother on their own, decides, oh, I can't afford a baby. This was, I can't deal with this and that sort of thing. It was their mistake, and yet they're taking out their mistake on a third party that had nothing to do with anything. Because if you understand, like from as far as I can tell, from the medical perspective, from any kind of perspective, that's a unique individual, has their own unique DNA strand, can have a completely independent blood type from the parent. Actually, in some instances, the mother's body will actually treat that new person as a invader in the womb and stuff like that, which is why there's hormones that are released during pregnancy to suppress the body's defenses, because otherwise the body's defenses would attack that child as a foreign.
Hence why
50%
of pregnancies naturally miscarry. Like even without abortion, 50% of all conceptions would not be children that are taken to term.
Yes, because the body's natural defenses treats it as a foreign, which completely negates the it's a part of her body kind of argument. So anyway, it's a completely separate individual inside the mom, and that completely separate individual has had no say whatsoever in what has occurred so far. They were brought into this world by the combination of their parents' DNA.
Yeah,
and they have no choice at this point. The only thing that infant can do, or that growing, developing human can do, is become a fully mature infant and get born. They have no other. They can't do anything else but that. That is the one thing that their body will allow them to do. That's just they have no voluntary choice to do anything else. And yet the mom, who had the choice to have sex and engage in sex that would create a child, then has the choice to eliminate that newly formed child. Like, that's giving them way more rights without any responsibilities.
Correct.
That's why that's a problem. And I was like, that there's a responsibility that if you are going to engage in consensual sex and it produces an offspring, you've already made your choice, and you now have a responsibility to at least take care of that child until they have some other way of being protected and provided for outside of you. That is my position on this. Is like, okay, so you get pregnant, you can't afford the kid, you can't take care of it, and all that sort of thing. Morally speaking, and from the perspective of natural rights, you no longer get a say in what happens to that third person. The only thing you can do is go to term with that child, give birth, and then provide somebody else who's going to take care of that child, if that's the situation. Like either adoption, or there's state agencies that'll take the child from you and that sort of thing. But
then their irresponsibility that they're placing on the taxpayers.
Yes.
Which all right, and why should I, a hardworking taxpayer, have some of my money taken away from me to support their fucking kids?
Yeah.
It wasn't my dumbass decision to fuck without a condom. That was their dumbass decision.
Yeah, like, people were fortunately enough in the area I live in. It's a very rare thing to hear about anyone my age getting pregnant. However,
also anyone of your biology. That's
yeah, that would be very remarkable.
Well, yeah, I'm just fortunately enough, it's like because they had a really strong, because the teacher in the 9th grade and even in the 11th grade, there was this class called Teen Living, and HUMANe kind of reminds me of that teacher, because she would drill it into our heads about beyond pregnancy, because pregnancy is not really a big worry. Getting a disease is the bigger worry. She would just drill that into our heads mercilessly. She would be relentless with it. She would just make sure that everyone understood it. She would show us what the diseases looked like, which I still want to pour bleach in my eyes. I did not want to see that. Yeah. But I understood why she was showing it. She was like, this is what will happen if you are not careful. Make your choice wisely. And, I thought it was way more effective than just on its own, just talking about pregnancy.
Okay. And so I don't want the entire topic to be about just the abortion issue, but I did have one last point to say, because the person I was arguing with was saying pregnancies are expensive and all that sort of thing. I'm like, people in Zimbabwe, the poorest country on the planet, still have a ton of pregnancies every year. It's in the millions. Zimbabwe, the poorest country in the world, they have pregnancies, and they deliver babies.
Yeah.
And you're saying that that's expensive, and I'm like, but people in Zimbabwe, they can afford to have a pregnancy. They cannot always afford to have an abortion. Which one is the more expensive of the two? Again, I'm a little confused as to like,
Yeah,
oh well, a pregnancy is expensive, and I'm like, maybe in America because we've got all these overboard stuff. But it was like people were giving birth, for like throughout entire human history when people were the average income outside of kings and all that sort of thing, people were making like 12 cents a day prior to the last 200 years. So the thinking that, oh, well, pregnancy is expensive, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Then how did we all get here? But abortions are expensive compared to a pregnancy. So that's a silly argument. Okay, I forget why I went off on that tangent, but it's just something that occurred to me. But we're trying to get back to the responsibilities, right? Because you have a responsibility, and this is what I think would happen. So if there were a ban on abortions, it wouldn't be the back alley abortion nightmare that people try to paint.
No.
At that point, it's putting more responsibility onto people to like, oh, I now no longer have a get out of jail free card. I now have to take pregnancy in consideration. It's like, well, if I get pregnant, I can't go to the abortion clinic unless I can prove it was rape or it was some kind of medical condition. So this should have the effect of people starting to change their sexual behaviors because they're like, oh, now I have the responsibility of, well, if this happens, I'm stuck with this child unless or until I can find somebody else who's willing to take care of that child.
Stupid people probably won't change their sexual behavior. Stupid people will still be retarded.
Yeah. You can bring the retardation into people, but you can't take it out of them, unfortunately.
Because even with legal abortion, it's still obvious that using a condom is by far the more sensible option. And you get still. So I really can't fathom how stupid you have to be to fuck without a condom unless you are
You're breaking up again.
Yep.
All right. And well, so what used to happen in these situations is there something called shotgun weddings, right? So, hey, you knocked up this woman, stupid sexual practices, you guys didn't think things through, you didn't take any responsibility. Well, now you're stuck with each other for life.
I mean, you're not married and don't like how you made or not.
I'm sure he's got a good point, but he just keeps breaking up and I can't. Yeah, nothing now. He's probably dropped off. I don't know if he disconnected completely.
Yeah, Loudmouth, if you're able to get yourself to like where like the connection can be stronger, I hope you could get there.
Okay. Yeah, so we used to have shotgun weddings where it was like, okay, you were dumb enough to make all the choices required to get yourself pregnant. Now you both are stuck with each other and you're both responsible for raising that child. And if you don't want that responsibility, then don't do the acts that create a child. And that's been the case for most of society, and we tried to get rid of that as if we could remove the responsibility, and that wouldn't make behaviors change. Or because even back in the day, shotgun weddings and all this sort of, even though it's a common colloquialism, they weren't as common as the amount of out of wedlock pregnancies that we now have. Because I mean, the only reason to have a shotgun wedding is an out-of-wedlock birth or pregnancy. Pregnancies usually happen within the marriage, and that was the case for a good portion of the history of America and most Western countries. Is we had this solid foundation of married. Okay, two people are now locked together, and then they have a kid. And it was backwards to do it the other way, right? Okay, two people have a kid, and now we force them to, to stick together. So it's like we got rid of the social stigma around having a kid outside of wedlock, and we expected the usual amount of, of, I guess the term is bastard, the usual amount of bastard birth or pregnancies to occur, and instead they skyrocket. And now we get to the point where, what is it, like, is it 80% of black families, black pregnancies are from single mothers? Is that I think that is the latest. It's upwards of 80%. And you're like, that is ridiculous considering black pregnant, or the black family, as far as marriages, were more stable than white families in, what was this, the 1930s, 1940s? No, it's probably closer to the 1916 to 1930, I think, was the dates for that. So, the black family, you saw more children in wedlock than amongst whites, and now we get the exact opposite, where now we're seeing 80%, and you're like, that's pretty huge. And also, amongst the white population, it's also gone up pretty drastically. I think it was, gone from the, single the digits to maybe dozens, 15%, and this is about 100 years ago. In that course of time, it's gone up to like 40 to 50%, which is insane. And it's all because, from my perspective, it's because, I think, not I think, but this is a perspective that you start to realize once you start researching economics. Because economics, it's not just how people spend money and how money flows, but that's why, is it human action? Is that Mises? Or is that... That's not Charles Murray, or that's not Murray Rothbard. Yeah, it was... Man, I'm forgetting the author at the moment. I'm like, any one of those seems like they could have written this book. Anyway, forgetting which author in particular wrote, but his book on economics is called Human Action. And I'm sure people in the comments might be...
I'll look it
whatever.
Human.
I should know which author that was, but... I cannot, for some reason at the moment, it escapes me. I want to say that was Mises, but...
Let me see.
Action.
It
No,
was
it's
written
not
by...
Mises, it's not
Yes,
Rothbard.
you are right.
Oh, it is. Okay,
was-
it is Mises. Okay.
Human Action was written by Ludwig von
Yeah.
Mises. Yes,
Okay.
you got
Okay.
it right.
It just doesn't seem right in my head. I'm like, it seems like it should be somebody else. Anyway, okay, so, yeah, Human Action, and it's the analysis of why humans behave in a certain way, and it's talking about incentive. Like, when prices drop, people now have an incentive to buy things that they wouldn't normally buy.
Supply and demand.
Yeah, supply, and when the prices of things go up, people no longer have that incentive to keep buying that. And it's focused on, okay, if I remove the incentive to behave in a better way, can you still expect people to behave in that better way? And throughout human history, we've seen no. Whenever you remove whatever incentive people have to behave a certain way, they stop behaving that way. And if you reverse the incentive, which is what we often see, is not just the, hey, we're no longer making it an incentive to have a child in wedlock because then you're not, a social pariah and all that sort of thing. But we've gone and flipped it the other way. It's like, oh, hey, you had a child out of wedlock? Good for you. You're such a good person. Oh, you're a strong, independent woman who's raising a kid by herself. I'm like, we flipped the script. So now instead of the incentive being to, hey, don't have a kid outside of wedlock because then, people will ignore you. You'll be shunned by society. It's a very detrimental thing to occur. Yeah. Check the live chat. Chair has some questions.
Yeah, my live chat.
I don't have that pulled up.
Let me get
so if you would just read those for me.
All right, sure.
Yeah.
Chair says, let me go back. Put your sources and citations on screen. I'm in need of citation on the absent father stat you gave. That's what he's asking.
The absent father stat?
Yeah.
You're talking about the black fathers?
Yeah.
I don't have that pulled up directly. I thought that was common knowledge. Okay. Okay. So, just a quick Google search. Almost 70% of black children are born to single moms, and that's from Wikipedia. In 1992, 25% of African American families were simple nuclear families. So, I guess I don't know why you need my sources. You can just do a Google search, and you can already see that Wikipedia says it's upwards of 70%. I don't know how accurate that is or what time frame that is from, but that one says 72%. Okay, so this is from May 2017, 77 cents black births to single moms. This is from the Washington Examiner. So I guess I'll just cite that, and because that is 2017. And I'm not in your chat, so maybe you can just link that. So that is, 77%. That's...
All right.
And that was from 2017, so from what I understand is currently in 2018, it's upwards of 80%.
All right.
That's... I don't think that's too much of a stretch, or that's, hey, you're gonna... Oh, it's 3% off. Okay. I don't know if you would split hairs on that. Oh, if you're talking about percentages during the 1920s, I don't know if that's the exact time frame, but I do know Larry Elder has talked about that. Ben Shapiro's talked about that. Walter Williams has talked about that exclusively. I mean, just... okay, let's see... really should have that. Let's see. Man, let's see.
So I linked Chair, your source, in the live chat. So hopefully, he sees that and he can make his own judgment. But to be completely honest, while we're here, just to be completely straight up, well, when it comes to young people having kids and everything, like I knew someone who's only like 15 or 16 when they got pregnant. I'm thinking, yeah, it's like you're in the 9th grade. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, if you want to sleep around, that's your business. But I had like little to no sympathy whatsoever. Like as soon as I heard, about someone becoming, a mom at the age of goddamn 15, like. That link only talks about immigrant births, says Chair in the chat.
Wait, what?
Yeah, he says that the link that you provided me, which I provided to him in the live chat, he says only talks about immigrant births.
It's 49% for Hispanic immigrants. It's not talking about African American immigrants. That's... So it's like the second paragraph right here. 77.3% of non-immigrant black births were illegitimate. That's like the second paragraph in, dude. I get that you don't like the fact, but to try to dismiss it because you don't like it doesn't matter. This is not something that is highly debated, or at least not from what I understand. Is people on both sides are like, yeah, that's what those rates are. I don't understand why you are the sole person who's like, oh no, this is this is obviously lies. And I'm like, no, this is a problem. This is a problem a lot of black politicians have talked about on the left and the right. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. Now, I think I know the reason why you don't particularly like it, because you think, oh, well, that's just because they're black. No, it's not. It has nothing to do with race or genetics. This is a cultural problem. Because the same illegitimacy is not that illegitimacy rate in the U.S. is not the same as in other countries that are predominantly black. You can go to
Go ahead.
Yeah, you can go to countries where the population is predominantly black, and you won't see those rates of illegitimate births because it's based on the culture, and that's I get I get that people like what's his name, Richard Spencer and idiots like that who will say, oh no, this is a clear sign of an inferior race, and I'm like, but it's only happening in the U.S. There's not enough of a genetic difference between blacks in the U.S. compared to blacks in Zimbabwe or blacks in Botswana or blacks in South Africa or blacks in Ethiopia and Somalia, and yet you will see solid families in some of those countries I mentioned because they have a cultural acceptance of the family unit. It has broken down in the United States because we no longer put the emphasis on that nuclear family like we did back, 50 to 60 years ago. It has died out in the Americas, and now we have spread the message of free love in the streets, and we have removed legal penalties for people who don't abide by the rule of, get married and then have kids. We have removed their responsibility in society due to cultural norms, and we have removed the legal penalties. And we have incentivized illegitimate births in the United States. There are often cases where the baby daddy will not marry their mom because if they did so, they would lose out on welfare benefits. So there's instances, this is purely that part is not anecdotal. That part is statistically valid, and I don't have the resources or the sources with me at the moment. But on a purely anecdotal situation, I know at least 3 people that I've talked to in the past month where they're in that situation where this guy is with this woman, they've been committed to each other, they have numerous kids together, they cannot get married, otherwise they would lose their house. That's one particular instance where they want to get married, but they cannot because they will lose their finances, and then they'll be out on the street, and they won't be able to take care of their kids because right now they're living off of government welfare. That's one of the 3. The other 2 are in a similar situation where they may not lose their house if they get married, but they will lose a substantial portion of their income if they get married. Because then the government will see them as a combined household and will they might lose their benefits because now it's going to take his income in association with her, and that's going to put them over the limit for how much they can receive on welfare. But if it's just her on the tax record, she gets the full benefits, and then he gets to come in with his job as just the boyfriend who's helping support her, and he pays taxes separately, and it doesn't take away her benefits. So it's not just a race thing. That to say that it is a race thing is to be stupid like Richard Spencer and try to boil it down to one common thing. It's like, no, it's a myriad of things all put together. It's the loss of the social stigma against this type of behavior, and it's the incentive. So like I said, we flipped the incentive entirely. It used to be if you had a child out of wedlock, you were shunned by your family, by society, you were looked down on as the dregs of society because they understood you are creating an unnecessary burden on yourself and on others. And now we've flipped it so that way, I wish I would have had an abortion, or I wish I was a single mom and that sort of thing, and they're touted as heroes. And you're like, now, so there's, I guess I gotta specify here, is women who are able to raise a child on their own, and that child turns out being okay, like in the instance of Ben Carson, like those are strong women that you're like, yes, those are good role models, and I wish we had more of those. But you know what would have been even better is if if Ben Carson had a dad, and they had a stable family. Who knows what he could have? I mean, he's already a huge success and that sort of thing, but the odds of him becoming that success would have been even more likely given the statistics that come out of the children of two-parent households. When you're talking about the lower crime rate, the more chances of success, the more chance of being better off, that sort of thing. There's too much, and if you don't believe me on those sources, just do Google searches on this stuff. These are not isolated incidents, and these are not.
When you're done rambling, can I explain to you that I thought you said that white people was the high number and not black people? I thought you said the opposite.
Oh.
That's why I thought you were wrong, because I thought you said white people.
No. Yeah, I said, I think with whites, I don't know the exact number, but I think we're up to 40%. It's the royal we. I'm not even white.
Yeah.
Even though you look white as fuck.
Yeah, anyway. I look Korean. Or at least I supposedly. I don't know.
I do.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, I think the illegitimacy amongst whites is 30 to 40%. Somewhere in that range.
Can we not use that word though? Because like it just feels wrong to be like you're talking about a kid and stuff. Like if you're a kid that was born and your parents weren't married and they go, "Oh, yeah, you were illegitimate." Do you know how crappy that makes someone that would make someone feel, you know?
Well, who cares about their feelings? It's legit. It's a word describing the situation. If somebody.
Okay, I think the term is silly because if you're just dating someone and you're not married to them and you get pregnant, and you're a single mom, let's say, or whatever, that pregnancy is still legitimate. That pregnancy is still there. That baby's still inside you. It's, you know.
No, that's an illegitimate pregnancy by the definition of what an illegitimate pregnancy is. And that child, by definition, would be a bastard. That's, a legitimate bastard.
Yeah, but Jon Snow's a bastard, and look how well he's doing. I mean, you know.
Okay. If the shoe fits, why are you complaining about the shoe? That's okay, that's like saying, you can't say the N-word, and I'm not going to say it on YouTube because YouTube is cracking down on language and all that sort of thing. But if someone is stealing from their neighbors, someone is selling drugs to minors, someone is going around shooting up their neighborhoods, and is an overall pariah and a plague on their community, but don't call them the N-word because, that might hurt their feelings. I'm like, they are the embodiment of the N-word.
What?
How could, but don't use that word, because that word, I'm like, no, that, it fits. It's a accurate description of what they're doing or their situation.
I wanted to clarify what you said about the mother's body rejecting fetuses.
Yes.
In which cases does that happen?
In cases where there is a miscarriage because the body will attack the infant. That's...
There's that, but it's not... A miscarriage isn't always...
No, it's not always. There's a whole host of factors that lead to a miscarriage. It's not...
Usually it's... A lot of women, it comes down to stress. It's like... Stress is a big factor in a lot of miscarriages.
Unnecessary stress. Sometimes it is.
But that's
sometimes
it's
just the body
rejecting the fetus. But that's not like the body just deciding this is an intruder. I gotta get rid of it. It's an infection. I gotta get it out. It's not quite that. I don't know how to.
I never said all miscarriages were that. I said that does happen with miscarriages, but that points to this being an independent entity and not being a part of the mother's body.
Oh, I know, but for a second there, I thought about the whole thing where, what's his name? What's that senator that said that, the woman's body has a way of shutting down rape?
Todd Aiken, he was a fucking moron.
Yeah.
Way of shutting down rape?
I was hoping that's not what you were saying, and I just wanted to make sure.
Oh, God.
How would that be in any way related to rape? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I was just saying this is a separate entity. Because, unless people are saying that this is some kind of disease, or I mean, this is that you can look this up. That this does happen as a medical thing where the mother's body fails to recognize that the woman is pregnant and attacks the baby as if it's an invader.
Not a very high percentage though. That's the thing.
No, it's not a very high percentage, but that instance happening is not considered a disease. It's not considered an immune, abnormality. It's just, hey, it was a bad pregnancy. It's not considered like some kind of autoimmune disease or something. It's not named, or at least as far as I know, as like some kind of syndrome. It's just that pregnancy just didn't work out for whatever reason.
My view on abortion is that I don't agree with abortion unless it's like a rape or something like that, or some other bad situation where it's harmful to the mother's body, or the mom's health is gonna be endangered by the pregnancy. But at the same time, I still recognize that for the most part, it is still her choice. Like, obviously, I want my partners to discuss that with me if that's their decision, right? I would still want to talk about it with them. But at the same time, it's still their body. You know what I mean? Like, that's why it's difficult because, like, I don't know. When my wife got pregnant, we thought about the whole abortion thing, but then we said no, that we're not going to do that or whatever. But
okay.
But there's someone the other day who posted a picture on Twitter where they're in a gown in like the shower room at the women's clinic, and it said, "I'm going to get an abortion now, guys. Wish me luck." And it was like, she was celebrating it.
I don't know if that was legit or if that was a troll, because then they went on to say that, asking for money and things along those lines. I don't know if that was legitimate or...
There are people like that. Even if it was a troll, there are people who do that, and it's bullshit. Like, you should celebrating the abortion, like Lena Dunham being like, "I wish I had an abortion so I could relate to these women better." It's like...
Yeah, that's...
That would require someone to actually want to take one for the team and get her pregnant.
So,
oh my god!
So Humane,
jumping on a huge grenade there. Anyway,
with your background, Humane, right? You're Christian, right? Aren't you?
Yes.
And so do you believe that rights are God given?
Yes. Well, I mean, in the sense that, as far as God given, I don't think that they. Let's see. So even if there was no God, you would still have the rights because they're innate within being a human. That's the definition. And if you think that, well, if humans were created by God, then He gave them those innate rights. So I don't think that a God is required for rights, but I do think that, from my perspective, we were created by God, and during that creation, we are imbued with natural rights. That's just part of our inherent being.
But to say that rights are always there and stuff, then why did they have to write what your rights are in the Constitution if the rights are already there? You know what I mean? That's what I'm asking. Like, which rights are automatic in humans, do you think? Like, I'm just saying, if you think that some rights are automatically there, beginning of time, as soon as they're born or whatever, what?
Okay.
So this is right to be alive, obviously, but what are the?
Well, this is okay. So we'll try to go on for about half an hour more. I do have things to do tonight. I'll try to get the rest of this wrapped up in this next half an hour here. Okay, so rights were not something, at least they were something that people acted upon, but no one had clearly defined them until about the Enlightenment period. So we're talking about Adam Smith, John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, around that time frame. And so when rights are not created by the Constitution, rights were created as the product of philosophy. So
they're held up by the Constitution.
Yes. So so the Bill of Rights is not. That's something that people commonly misunderstand as well, because that is not what gives us our rights or what protects it does protect our rights, but those are restrictions on the government. Those are restrictions on the federal government saying you will not do these things. No matter what, you will not infringe upon the people's right to freedom of the press, freedom of speech, the right to freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, the right to a speedy trial, the right to not to to be independent as far as not being forced to house soldiers, not being forced to do all. I mean, there's trying to go through the list of amendments in my head here. So there's a right to, not be illegally searched and seized, because these were all things that the British government was violating of the people. Yeah. And so the natural rights exist inherently in humans, and you can see this throughout history, because when people are put in a situation where their natural rights are being infringed, they lash out violently. This is what leads to revolutions, like the French Revolution. Hey, it got too much. Slaves running away. Well, if it was, that's the reason they're running away is because it's not the natural tendency to be imprisoned by and forced to work for someone else. That is not the norm. The only reason more slaves didn't run away is because they thought it was futile, right? It's because, hey, last guy who ran away, they got chased down by dogs and were, either, hanged from a tree or shot, or probably ended up getting devoured by said dogs. There's a whole bunch of, I'm just thinking in the U.S. sort of thing, but it's brutal, absolutely brutal.
There are also some slaves who felt that there's some, like, obviously they would want to be free, but there are some slaves that did think that their masters treated them somewhat fairly, and then they saw how some of the other people were living, and they're like, I don't want to, I don't know. It's just,
yes.
It's though, the whole thing about the...
Yeah, probably a whole nother conversation, but yeah, the idea is, you look at the way people
writing
react.
About rights, though, that's the trouble that I have sometimes, is some of the people that were writing about the Bill of Rights and everything else when they're writing it, they still had their own slaves, and it's just like, you're talking about the right to be free and stuff like that, but yet you still have slaves back home. It's like,
okay, so in the defense of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, legally they were not allowed to free their slaves. And if they did free their slaves, those slaves would become the property of somebody who would treat them as property. Whereas if you look at the writings of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington concerning their slaves, they actually treated them much better than other slave owners in the area. They treated them like indentured servants for the most part. I don't know if there's any particular incidents of Thomas Jefferson or George Washington like beating their slave to death or, mistreating them, and even though there's rumors of, Thomas Jefferson having sex with some of his female slaves.
They call him a rapist for it.
Yeah.
People have called him a rapist for it.
Those, to the best of my knowledge, have not been substantiated. Those are just rumors. I don't know if any of it's true. But based on his writings concerning the situation, he actually viewed blacks as inferior when you're talking about, he actually thought, based on, the science of the times, that blacks were inherently genetic inferior.
I know that's why I find it ironic that they were sitting there talking about rights and freedom on this.
But even with that, he still thought that they should be freed, which is why he fought for legislation in Virginia to free slaves, and Virginia shot it down. And it was even to the point where when George Washington, so Virginia at the time, the law would not allow you to free your slaves while you were alive, but you could do it in your will, which is what George Washington did. And when Virginia saw that George Washington did this, they closed that loophole so that way Thomas Jefferson couldn't do the same thing on his deathbed, because he had it in his will, but they would not legally recognize that, and his slaves went to somebody else. I don't know if somebody else in his family or something like that.
What about the problems that the British made, where they were like, if you join our cause and fight for us, then after the war, if you survive, you'll be free.
Okay.
There's that offer too. Do you think that the other side or whatever should have made a similar offer?
I don't know. Probably.
I don't know, because that would have to, there's a whole host of problems which Thomas Jefferson wrote extensively about concerning the abolition of slavery, because he was trying to avoid at all costs the Civil War, because there was a large amount of slaves in the United States. I mean, it wasn't as much as other places apparently, if you look at the raw numbers. But there were a lot of wealthy plantation owners who had slaves, and if you're saying, if you just fight in the war and now you're free, well, that plantation owner they have no choice, right? If one of their slaves goes off and joins the war, well, they just lost however much they invested in that. Because you got to think, at the time, they basically saw the black slaves as machines, right? Think of it as like, okay, you just bought this new, this new thing that builds a car, right? So if you just bought this, in today's currency, probably closer to like $50,000 machine that prints whatever car part. And then the government comes along and says, okay, if that machine prints car parts for the war, then we're going to take them for a little while. And now that machine belongs to us, and then that machine is free. It can go to whatever business, after the war. And you're like, but I paid $50,000 for that. What happens to me?
Don't get me wrong. I am completely against the idea that they acted like slaves were expendable and just cannon fodder, basically, and all that. But I don't know. It's just interesting. But yeah.
So going back to the issue of rights themselves, the founding fathers wrote extensively on trying to get rid of slavery. And actually, George Mason, one of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, did not ratify the U.S. Constitution specifically because it did not ban slavery. So the abolition of slavery started later on when it was put into law that new slaves could not be could not be bought and sold in the United States. So the existing slaves could stay because they were already, the people who had purchased them had already purchased them and were trying to get the money back. So, I mean, it's not granted, it's a bad situation all around, but you got to think there is no clear solution of like, oh, just get rid of slavery. Well, it's like, well, then that you're asking people to give up their entire livelihood because people were basically sinking all of their money into purchasing slaves, thinking that those slaves would eventually earn the money back. Same way that people invest in new buildings and new businesses. Like, okay, well, it's going to cost me $200,000 to start this new business, but that new business is going to make me $400,000. And then imagine the government coming along and saying, oh, nope, now that business is ours, and you're just out $200,000. You're like, well, then I'm not going to start any business whatsoever, and that completely collapses the economy. That's the issue that Thomas Jefferson was writing about extensively concerning this, is like, he didn't want that to occur. And we actually had proposed, and which is actually what some of the northern states started doing, is buying slaves from southern slave owners and then releasing them in the north. And this is actually how Britain managed to remove slavery. Like the UK got rid of slavery peacefully by buying slaves from slave owners and then giving them freedom.
Yeah.
And that's what Thomas Jefferson had proposed several times, and it kept getting shut down. There's a whole slew of conflict concerning that particular issue, but that would have been a better alternative had we been able to do that in the United States. So going back to rights, so rights are the ideals that we come to based on philosophy. So the disconnect is, okay, ideals, like the goal to shoot for. Hey, these are things that we know and understand, and getting to there are two separate things.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, think about it like going to the moon. Although maybe that's a bad example. I'm trying to think of a better one, but I can't think of it. It's like going to the moon. Okay, the moon is the objective. Well, what do we need to know in order to get to the moon? Okay, well, we know that we need some kind of fuel to get the rockets there. We know we need spacesuits that can survive the outer. Okay, knowing all of that, we knew all that prior, because way before Apollo 1. And yet it took 13 Apollo missions before we could actually even get close to achieving that goal. So, blaming what the Founding Fathers did after, hey, they acknowledge that humans have rights and all men are created equal, and then they go on and hold slavery. It's like, well, that's like blaming Apollo 1. It's like, well, you guys know what you need to do in order to get to the moon. You didn't go to the moon. I'm like, knowing what needs to be done and doing it are two separate things.
Yep.
But as long as you keep the goal in mind, and as long as you're taking active steps towards that goal, then you will eventually get there. As long as every step along the way is towards that goal. And that's what started with the Enlightenment phase, is we like, okay, we now know a clear, definite goal. Mm-hmm. Human rights and preservation of those human rights. That's the goal. Now we're trying to figure out, okay, how exactly do we ensure human rights? How exactly do we make sure that human rights are not violated? What can we do? And every step along the way has been towards increasing protection of natural human rights. Well, I would say every...
Until 2016.
Yeah, no, it's probably until about 1913, and then things started kind of going the other way when it became about increasing the size of government and encroaching upon those rights. And we started to see, so from 1776 until about 1910, 1911, somewhere in that range, we saw this increasing freedom, and then there was a flip in the government situation in the United States where, well, it's kind of like a whole host of things came together in about 1912 and 1913. We're talking about the establishment of the Federal Reserve, the establishment of a federal tax that has not been lifted, and the institution of the draft, which, when was that, 1916? I don't remember the exact date on that. But it was within a 5-year period that those three things were instilled into the Constitution. Once those were a part of the Constitution, the government was no longer restrained, because now it could print its own money, it was always able to print its own money, but now thanks to the Federal Reserve, it was now able to do that endlessly without concern. It was now able to bankroll operations that previously wouldn't have been able to be bankrolled. And then the establishment of taxes, well, hey, now we've got, when our banking system fails us, we can just tax the population. Oh, and hey, if we got a war, we've got to defend ourselves, now we can actually get people to enforce them to fight for us. Yeah. Those three things put together put the power into the government over the people, whereas prior to those three things, the government was under the power of the people. It was a pretty massive swing that nobody at the time really understood. But we can, going back and looking at history, we're like, that was the point where the government got power over the people, and that master-servant relationship shifted. And then it became, the government, and then people started thinking the government gives us our rights. And like, no, none of the founding fathers they all said, it's even in the Declaration of Independence, that our natural rights are endowed by us and these rights endowed by our Creator, and they are unalienable. So the idea of unalienable means no one, no government, no person, no entity can take them away. And anyone who does so would be violating the natural rights, would be violating what we've established as the truth. That's the issue. So the U.S. government was designed to okay, we need something to protect people's natural rights, and we're trying to keep that something from violating those unalienable, same word, it's just different phrasing on it. Mm-hmm. But the idea is those rights exist, and violating those rights is the problem. And so we need a government that stops people from violating other people's rights, and also cannot violate people's rights itself. Now, it was pretty successful for about 100 years, and then, like I said, in that flip over in about the 19-teens, that's when we started to see the government increasingly violating people's rights. And it just kept... It kept building its own power, and now we see all these things where we're like, okay, why is that a law, and why are you punishing people for smoking weed? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's looking at the Constitution, looking at the Founding Fathers' documents and writings, they were actually large portion of them were hemp farmers at the time. So George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, I believe, also grew hemp. There's a couple other Founding Fathers, but hemp was a pretty big product. It was a pretty big... it wasn't as big as cotton, but hemp was big for the United States. Yeah. And then for some reason, we banned or made it a narcotic, and now it is, you can't even buy and sell and smoke, and it's absolutely ludicrous. Mm-hmm. Because it's creating victims where there wouldn't otherwise be victims. So the entire purpose of rights is to avoid the creation of victims. Because
Yeah.
when somebody's rights are violated, they become a victim. So if no one's rights are violated, there are no victims. And yet the government comes along and says, hey, there's no victims, let's make one, which means the government is violating rights. So going back to what exactly natural rights are, natural rights, from everything I've understood about them, because we talked about positive and negative rights, right, S-Man? So
Yeah.
in order for something to be a right, and maybe we need a new word, because right seems to be overused. Like, you go into that definition of like, well, that's, so you got correct, right versus left. You're talking about fixing something or setting it upright, and it's like, well, those aren't what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about natural rights. I'm like, maybe we need a new word so that way it's less confusing what you're actually talking about.
No.
Anyway. But it's been understood, and there's documents talking about natural rights and positive versus negative rights. So, in my understanding, the only actual rights a person can have are negative rights. Because in order to be a negative right, it has to be something that can be universally applied. So every human being can have this right. Universally applied, and is non-competitive. That means in order to grant it to one person, it isn't removed from another person. So, the right to life falls within this range, because in order for me to have the right to life, I'm not taking that from somebody else.
Yeah.
It doesn't require anything on your part for me to have the right to life. It doesn't require, there's 7-point-something billion people on this planet. None of those 7 other billion people need to do anything other than not kill me. So that's a right to life, and it is considered a negative right because it just means you can't do, you can't do this. You cannot kill me. That is the idea expressed by my right to life. You cannot kill me. So it's saying you can't do this specific action that would end my life. Mm-hmm. That's why it's considered a negative right.
Yeah.
The right to liberty. All right. Okay. Just don't imprison me. Don't force me to do your will rather than my own will.
Yeah.
Okay, that requires nothing on your part. It just requires you not to do something that forces me in a position I don't want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
That means you have to let me, so that, okay, that's something we can give to all the 7-point-something billion people on the planet. Doesn't require anything on my part, doesn't require anything on your part. Okay, that's something we can grant. Yeah. The right to the pursuit of happiness, same thing along with liberty. It's like, okay, that means if I want to do something and it's not violating anybody else's right to life or liberty, you get to let me do that. If I want to smoke heroin until I die, or smoke heroin, I don't know if you smoke.
Yeah,
whatever. If I want to shoot heroin until I die, it's not violating your right to life. It's not violating your right to liberty. You cannot stop me from doing that. If I want to have all the butt sex with gay orgies, then you cannot stop me from doing that.
Am I invited?
I don't know. It's a hypothetical that I don't really want to do. I'm saying just.
Just joking.
Yeah.
No. I am against butt stuff even in a heterosexual relationship. That just sounds like you get
hypothetical, everybody.
Well, I mean, so one of my buddies described this way. He's like, well, why would you want to go to the desert when you've got an oasis right in front of you? I'm like, just go to the oasis.
Ever heard the song "Fuck Me in the Ass" because I love Jesus? You never
I heard that song. It was so fucking funny.
All right.
If you made him listen to it, he'll hate us.
All right. So trying to wrap all this up in the next 10 minutes here. Okay. So those are negative rights, and there's other rights. So the right to personal property. Okay. I can own things, and me owning something doesn't take away your right to own things. It just takes away, or you just don't have the right to own what I own, right? So my house is my house. You don't get access to my house, but then me owning a house doesn't stop you from owning a house. Mm-hmm. So that the right to natural or private property, okay, that's something we can universally apply to someone. It's like, okay, you get the right to own things, and no one else can take them away from you. That's something that can be universally applied, doesn't require anything on your part, because you don't have to give me stuff, and I don't have to give you stuff.
Yeah.
I just have to be able to own the products of my labor. And for some reason, the products of my labor, the socialists will take to the, like, oh, that means, I was like, well, you got to understand that the capitalist also owned things and invested things, and you taking from them is taking the products of their labor. Yeah. Okay, so the right to private property, that's a natural right, and also so the right to self-ownership, right? Because this goes into the right of liberty. The idea behind that is self-ownership, so the right to own yourself and to own other things. And if you keep going along these lines, if you own yourself, that means you get to choose what happens with your body, right? That means if somebody is raping you, that's not your choice. That's your body that you own, and somebody else is using it for their purposes. That would be a violation of your rights. And you own the products of your work, which also means you own your words.
Yeah.
So no one else can control what you say, what your words come out. Basically, that's where you get the right to freedom of speech and the freedom of religion, the freedom of expression. So all of these natural rights stem out of the basic idea of the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to the pursuit of happiness. But actually, one of the original, was this actually in the Declaration of Independence, or was this from something else? Was actually, I don't know if this was the Federalist Papers or if this was an early draft of the Declaration, where they talked about, instead of it being the pursuit of happiness, it was actually written the right to own, or the right to personal property. I forget where exactly that was, because it was listed life, liberty, and personal property, and I don't remember if that was an earlier draft or something along those lines. But I think they might have changed that because of the slavery situation. And people were like, oh, well, that means, because they thought it might have been used in, if I'm not mistaken, they thought it might have been used to justify slavery. And it's like, well, that's my property, and you gave me the right to, you said I have the natural, unalienable right to own property. I'm like, it's a person, not property. Anyway.
Yeah.
Define property.
So these sorts of things. So those are the main three, and every other natural right that you can think of: the right to bear arms, the right to freedom of speech and religion, and all of these sorts of things basically come out of the right to personal property, the right of self-ownership, and the right to life. Anything that can logically be deduced from that again can be applied universally to all people, and it doesn't create competition between two people, as in giving me the right to freedom of speech does not take away from anybody else's right to freedom of speech. Okay, then I have the right to freedom. Giving me the right to defend myself and to, bear arms in order to defend myself doesn't stop anybody else from defending themselves. Okay, yeah. That's something universally applied. Now, the problem comes when people start calling things rights when there is competition between those rights. So when people say the right to life and they act as if that means you have to keep somebody else alive, well, that requires action on someone else's part. And This is a confusion when you're talking about this, because this is where it's like, oh, healthcare is a right. And you're like, well, in order for healthcare to be a right, someone has to provide that. That doesn't make any sense, because let's say, so if healthcare is a right and every person who is sick has to have somebody caring for them, basically I'm required to care for you, and you're required to care for me, and everybody's required to care for each other. And it's like, well, how do you do anything else other than healthcare if that's a right? I mean, because it requires each person to act a specific way in order to achieve a goal. Now, none of these other rights require anybody to act in a specific way. It just requires you to not do this one thing. Don't do this one thing. Don't do this one thing. Don't do this one thing. Not you have to do this one thing. So none of the other rights act in that way. Right? None of the other rights I've talked about, like the right to life, you don't have to act in a certain way. You just don't do the thing that would end up killing them. Don't do the one thing of killing somebody else. And And so that's when, but the right to healthcare is like, you have to do this certain thing. That's flipping the rights on their head and turning them into something else completely. And it requires you to be a slave to someone else, which is something that violates another right, right? So the right to liberty, and it's like, well, you have the right to liberty unless you're a doctor, and then in which case you have to continually, or you have to provide your medical expertise to someone who is dying, even if they can't pay for it, even if they can't, like, that's what would be, right? The right to life is, oh, hey, you're a doctor, and it requires medical training and your expertise and time away from your family and time away from earning money in other ways, and you have to heal this person.
Yeah.
Like, that is taking away their individual liberty, their individual right to pursue happiness, their individual right to personal property, because it's like, oh, well, you own this amount of insulin, and this person needs insulin in order to keep living. If they have the right to healthcare, you have to provide them your insulin. What?
Yeah.
That's because it conflicts with so many other rights. That's not something that can be universally applied without without contradicting other rights and even the ability for other people. So if you've got 10 things of insulin and you have 11 patients that need insulin, and but healthcare is a right, well, once you distribute the 10, one person doesn't get it. Oh, well, that's a problem. That is because there is a competition when you're talking about healthcare. Because, okay, so here's the other issue with rights. Oh man, I got 3 more minutes. Okay, we'll add another 15 minutes. I shouldn't do that. I really need to limit myself on time frame. I do have stuff I need to do before the end of the day. All right, but let's see. When did I start this? At 4:30. So.
We've been
Okay,
off.
we'll go to the 2 hour. So we're no, I probably should limit myself to under 2 hours. All right, because we didn't get to everything here. So, okay. So, the right to life is not a scarce resource. It's not a commodity. The right to liberty is not a commodity. The right to pursue happiness, not a commodity. And that's what I'm talking about with competition. There is no limit on the amount of life, at least as far as we know. I mean, we might run into issues with overpopulation and things like that, but as far as like the amount of people who can keep on living without killing other people, we're heading towards 10 billion. And that doesn't seem to be like, as soon as we get 10 billion in one, then somebody's going to die. And then we go to, it doesn't seem to be the case that if we reach this magic number, that every new person who is born makes another person die. Like, as far as I know, we are not at that point or even close to getting to that point. But if it got to the point where every new person born caused someone else to die, well, then we would have to put restrictions on birth rates, because you're like, hey, every child you have is actively killing someone else. But that doesn't seem likely in the near future or anything like that. So that's so it's not a commodity in that. And so as far as the right to liberty, there is no amount of liberty that can, like, oh, well, we've got 7.2 people on the planet, and we only have I don't know if that's the exact number, but 7 point whatever billion people. Sorry, not million.
Yeah.
Anyway, once we get to 8 billion people, we'll no longer have any more liberty to dole out. And you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Liberty is an infinite resource as far as we can tell. Pursuit of happiness, same thing. Like, there doesn't seem to be a limit on this sort of thing. Healthcare, on the other hand, is a limited resource. There's only so much healthcare that we can provide at a given time. There doesn't seem to be any amount of liberty that can be like, oh, nope, we're at our max of liberty today. Come back tomorrow. That doesn't. But healthcare, you're like, oh, well, we're out of drugs for today. Come back tomorrow. We're out of whatever. We're out of heart surgeons, so you have to wait for a heart surgeon to become available. we're out of gynecologists, so and OBGYN doctors, so we're limited on resources. That means it cannot be a right the way that these other natural rights are considered rights. And yet you have Bernie Sanders saying, "Oh, healthcare is not a privilege, it's a right." Well, it's not either. That was another thing that kind of spurred the idea behind this particular topic.
Yeah.
Is he said healthcare was a privilege, and I'm like, well, it's not a right because it is a commodity. It's limited. You can't give healthcare to everybody equally, and you cannot. And it creates competition when you try to give one person a heart at the expense of somebody else. But it's not a privilege either, because that's the idea of a privilege is something granted to one person but not granted to someone else, and it's like, well, that seems like an inaccurate description when it comes to healthcare. And because I guess, yes, there's you have to pay for it, but it's not restricted based on race or class or any other thing. It's just restricted on money. And if you can raise the money, you can have whatever service. It's not restricted based on anything else other than money. And that doesn't make it a privilege, because that would be like saying gas is a privilege, milk is a privilege, bread is a privilege, wheat is everything you purchase with money that you cannot get for free is a privilege, and that doesn't add up for me. It's like owning a house is a privilege. No, it's not a privilege. I mean, I guess it depends on how you're using the word, but it's not a legal privilege. It's not like you have to get special permission from. Because when you're talking about privileges, usually that is something that you have to get permission to do, right? But when you're talking about privileges, it's usually from a legal perspective. It's usually, okay, in order to become an electrician, you need a license. So that would be a privilege, because you actually have to request permission to do electrical work and to be recognized as an electrician. In order to become a doctor, you also have to get a doctor's license. That being a doctor is a privilege. Going to the hospital and paying for services rendered, that does not seem to fit the same bill of what a privilege is. I mean, basically Bernie Sanders thinks anything you have to pay for would be a privilege, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So the only thing that wouldn't be a privilege in his mind is breathing air. Because you have to pay for somebody to clean your water, you have to pay for somebody to produce your food, you have to pay for electricity, you have to pay for housing. Everything you do, you would have to pay for.
Yeah.
Even if you're living on your own as like some nomad, out in the wilderness, like say Slab City or whatever, and if you were able to hunt your own food and stuff, you would have to invest resources into hunting food and killing it and preparing it for food. That's it, or hunting animals and preparing them for food.
It was nice hanging out. I do it. I gotta get going though.
Okay. So, all right.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you guys later.
So, to consider hunting and killing food a privilege seems like a misuse of the word.
Yeah.
And you're like, because according to Bernie Sanders, that's kind of what it would fall under. Is like it seems like his definition of I guess of privilege is anything that you have to pay for, but that's anything you have to work for. And it's like that doesn't add up to me. And again, he's not exactly the brightest bulb when it comes to economics. Otherwise, he wouldn't have his viewpoints.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. So we're talking about so healthcare cannot be a right, and so going back to the other natural rights that I mentioned. So anything that would be along those lines where there would be competition because it's a limited resource and cannot be applied universally to all people. The other thing is, so it cannot contradict with any other rights. It cannot be limited in scope. And in order to grant it to one person, it cannot take away the rights from somebody else. So, putting all that together, every one of those rights has responsibilities that come with it. because then this is where our system of justice is supposed to be founded, although we've seen countless examples of it not falling along these lines and being considered an injustice. The right to life comes with it the responsibility, right? Because you don't give other people the right to life. Everybody has the inherent right to life. And so my right to life means nobody else can kill me. But the converse side of that is my responsibility not to kill anybody else. I have the responsibility to respect everyone else's right to life. And this is something that's vastly overlooked when people start to talk about this subject. And this is why I'm, going on for an extra 20 minutes. Oh, well, we'll go to 6:30, and then I do have to go.
All right.
So, yeah, that's... Should have left an hour ago. Anyway. Or no, should have cut it off at 5:30. Anyway, whatever, we're going for an extra full hour. Because this is a complex topic. And so this is an area that's often overlooked. So, with my right to life comes my responsibility not to kill anybody else with the right to life. And what happens is when I do, or when or if I do, I guess in my case it would be if, because I don't, it's not like when I'm planning to try to kill somebody. If, okay, well, let's take me out of the equation. So somebody with a right to life everyone with a right to life has the responsibility not to kill somebody else with a right to life. Now, if one person with the right to life does kill somebody else, then we as a society understand, okay, they don't recognize the right to life. We no longer recognize their right to life. This is why when somebody murders someone else, it's not an injustice to end the life of the murderer. That's actually what we do with our justice system a lot of the time. I'm getting a phone call, but I'll call them back afterwards. If you violate someone else's right to life because you ignored the responsibility that came with that, you lose your right to life. That's how all rights work. So, taking this to the other rights, okay, your right to liberty. If you imprison someone else, you holding them against their will, you kidnapping, rape would fall under this, slavery, all of these institutions that are violating somebody's liberty. If you do one of those things, well, guess what? We get to take you and put you in jail. You get to, and nobody raises an eyebrow about this. Nobody's like, how dare you take away their right to liberty? That's that's unalienable right. And I'm like, no, because we understand with the right of your personal liberty comes the responsibility of not taking someone else's liberty. And also, so all of these rights stack on top of each other. Your right to liberty also is based on your responsibility to recognize other people's liberty and also other people's right to life. Because if you violate somebody else's right to life, you could lose your liberty. If you violate somebody else's liberty, you could lose your liberty. All of these things, and I guess it kind of depends on the context of the scenario, because the goal is in order to stop somebody from violating rights, the least amount of force necessary to keep them from violating rights. So if somebody is a serial killer and murderer and you just put them in a cage for forever, well, they're no longer able to go around killing people. That seems like a suitable alternative to ending their life. I mean, provided they can be rehabilitated, although, because otherwise you start to go into the, now we have to provide food for them and keep them alive and all that sort of thing. It's like, well, why don't you just leave them in a cage and let them die and rot? Because that's probably going to end up being better than what they did for their victims.
And now it's like people are demanding that we should pay for the transition of inmates.
What?
Yeah.
No.
I was provided an article in one of these chats about that, and I'm like, no, I agree with agree with Kamala Harris when she was the Attorney General of California. I would have done the same thing. I would have appealed that decision.
I mean, like, okay, can we, like, has this person done something enough to be executed? Because maybe we should just execute them instead of paying for their transition surgery. That's what the heck.
think this person was convicted of murder. Let me go find the.
That is insanity.
Yeah, they're like, if you don't provide the health care for it, then it's cruel and unusual punishment. Where the fuck did I put that? I know I bookmarked it.
Oh, yeah, that is
Yeah,
insanity there. So
yeah,
so when you violate the rights of another, you lose yours. So that means you have the responsibility not to violate the rights of other people. That's basically what it boils down to. In order for your rights to be recognized, you have a responsibility to recognize everybody else's natural negative rights.
yeah.
That's
All right, I found the article. Let me see.
okay. That's insanity. What?
Yeah, cause Lapis shared in the chat. She's like, she just put the article there and um trying to
So
find.
if Lapis is serious about switching genders completely and getting surgery, Lapis doesn't even have to work for the money. Apparently, Lapis can just go murder someone and then go to jail and then get the surgery paid for by the government. That seems like that would be much easier than working for the money, themselves and paying for it out of pocket and, going into credit card debt. Like, much easier to just, hey, kill somebody, go to jail, and then say, okay, where's my sex change?
Because the person I think was convicted of second-degree murder or something. In this case, I'm like, I know this is not a popular opinion, but I had to agree with Kamala Harris because it's like I wouldn't want this state to,
Wait,
you
Kamala
know,
Harris. Wait, isn't that
yeah,
that crazy lady? Wait.
senator. She's the junior senator from California. She's like 56 years old. Yeah,
Yeah, that was that crazy lady at the Kavanaugh hearing. She was.
yeah. She was the Attorney General of California, and in 2015, the article came out mentioning the fact that she was appealing it, saying this person was not going to be in danger if they didn't get their HRT and the sex reassignment surgery. I had to agree, in the sense
Yeah.
that we shouldn't have to pay for it, and this person's not going to die without it.
Yeah, but it seems like she would be the opposite on that because like she's like a more radical leftist. And you would think she would be like, oh, no, this has to be done. This is... So it seems... It's not odd that you would have the position that aligns with her, because I think that's the correct position, because like I said, that's insanity to grant sex changes to someone who's in prison for doing something that created a victim. I'm granted, if it was something like tax fraud or, smoking, doing drugs, I'm like, okay, whatever, why are they in jail in the first place? And it would still be insanity to pay for their sex change while they're in jail. And like, well, if that's the case, just let them go and let them do it themselves. Yeah. I am. It doesn't make any sense to me to keep. This person has already created victims, and now you want to create more victims by taking their hard-earned money and their work and their labor and using it to pay for somebody else's something. Like that's creating more victims. It's not resolving the issue. It doesn't help the situation. Justice should be about rectifying the damage, repairing damage, restoring order, restoring peace, restoring causing the person who created victims, making them make amends to the victim. That's what justice should be. It's like, okay, we're in the negative. We're trying to get back to either the neutral or as close to that as possible. Sometimes it's not possible. Like, hey, you killed somebody. What can you do to make up for the person that's dead? Not a whole lot. You can't replace them. They are, that's where you're like, okay, but if you stole $1,000, well, then you should return $1,000 plus interest. That's justice. It's not hey, you stole $1,000, now you get to go to jail for a year, and by the way, we're going to give you a $10,000, or no, what is it, $100,000 surgery? I don't know, for the full sex change. It's like
I think it was no, you were right, $100,000 from what I saw, and to me it's like, I mean.
Somebody, well, if it was something, I don't know what this particular case is, because it might have been second-degree murder, in which case, yeah, you're like, no, they don't get any more. We should actually be taking things from them. Like, their life is forfeit, and they owe restitutions. That's because
Yeah.
so they should be working to pay off their debt to society or to the victim's family. Actually, that would be a more appropriate way to do justice. Although we don't, for some reason, do that in this state or this country. Um, it should be the case where if I am the victim, right? So if somebody comes along and steals my car, they shouldn't have to go to jail and pay their debt to society because I'm still out my car, and society is not going to give me a car back. That's stupidity, and that's what I saw firsthand when the guy broke into my storage unit, stole $5,000 worth of stuff. It was enough to be a felony for him, and my insurance only covered $2,000 of that, and I didn't get any of my stuff back. Not even the stuff they had as evidence. I called back, a couple months later after he'd already, after the trial had gone through and he'd already been sent off to prison. I'm like, I didn't get any of my stuff back. Not any, the stuff they had in evidence. I don't know what happened to it. They don't know what happened to it. I guess maybe it got sold off at a police auction, and so somebody else has my my silver. And I'm like, dude, I could have used that because that wasn't covered by my insurance. It's because that was recovered property. I couldn't claim that as it being insurance, and it's not recovered. It was put into police evidence, and it's gone. I should have, in retrospect, because they gave me the option to keep it in my possession and just, bring it to them for the trial. That's what I should have done. But now it's limbo, gone forever, and I'm out with that $700-something bucks, which would be really helpful right about now, for, paying for my business endeavors at the moment. And it's like, dude, it probably got sold off at a police auction for like $30 or something stupid like that. Anyway, yeah, so as far as I know, they lost all record of it, and I'm like, well, I'm out all of the stuff that got stolen. That guy is now in prison for 10 plus years, and taxpayers are paying for him. And I'm like, so he took $5,000, and now he's taking thousands of dollars a year being in jail. Where's the justice in this? It's like, oh, well, he's not out there stealing from anybody else. I'm like, yeah, but what, to me, the punishment does not fit the crime, because he should be making amends for the damage he's caused and the monetary loss that he caused me. But apparently our justice system isn't concerned about that sort of thing. They're just like, oh, hey, this person did something bad, they go to jail, and then it's like, that does not seem like justice to me. But so as far as I'm concerned, that individual was not living up to their responsibilities with their rights, and they violated my rights, and they violated the rights of others because they've have a past of being multiple criminal offenses and things like that, and now they are continuing to violate people's rights and create victims by living off of their tax dollars in the prison system. I'm like, that's at what point are we recovering, or are we getting compensated for that damage caused? Are we where's the rehabilitation? That what's the word there I'm looking for? The where's the reparations, right? What is being done to repair the damage caused? As far as I can tell, nothing. It's just causing further damage, which is absolutely backwards. Oh, there you go. I saw that you posted that article.
Yeah, because so I wanted to find it because Harris because it says Harris seeks a stay from U.S. District Judge John Tiger, I don't know, on his preliminary injunction requiring the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to offer the procedure to Michelle Lael Norsworthy, who's incarcerated at Mule Creek State Prison in California for murder in the second degree. Who's been treated for gender dysphoria for 20 years, and there's no indication that her condition has somehow worsened to the point where she must obtain sexual reassignment surgery now rather than waiting until this case produces a final judgment on the merits, Harris writes. Yeah, I was rather surprised. There was something
Okay. So
Yeah.
the courts had ruled that this person had to get the surgery, and Harris
Yeah.
was a, yeah,
Yeah.
and Harris was appealing that. That's what is going on over there. California is a madhouse.
Yeah. It's
Like,
pretty democratic. Like the last Republican that was elected, it was Arnold Schwarzenegger. We all know how he turned
yeah,
out. Part of me, I hate to say this, but there are days I almost find myself like rooting for the Republican nominee in California. Even though like, and now with the jungle primary, there's not been a Republican on the ballot for the Senate since 2012. I was like, that is a horrible voting system. If they should abolish it, but I know they won't. It's a power
all right,
grab for the Democrats.
okay, and all right. So I got about 9 minutes left, and I'll try to wrap this up as best as I can. So we've talked about. Okay, so the responsibilities that come with rights is the responsibility to make sure that you do not violate anyone else's rights in what you are doing. So when you are running a business, so this is something that, like socialists and all of them are, oh, greedy capitalists and evil corporations and all this sort of things. Like, if you are running a business and your business is polluting the environment and killing people and causing radiation and all that sort of thing, well, you are violating your responsibility to live up to the rights that you have been granted. That's so if your business is responsible for killing people or getting them sick, well, you violated, yeah, you failed in your responsibilities to not violate somebody else's rights. And you will lose your rights. That should be the case. And so if that's under an ANCAP society, that would be the law of the land. It's like, oh, if you polluted somebody else's land, well, guess what? They get your business. Everything you worked for, you lose it all. I mean, that would be, I don't know, depending on the nature of the pollution and all that sort of thing, and it's, but
Mm-hmm.
you lose your right to your personal property, because your personal property, it's showing that you personally cannot be held responsible, or have proven you are not responsible enough to be allowed to own your own personal property, because when you do, you use that personal property to violate somebody else's right. So you
Yeah.
lose that right.
Yeah.
That seems
Yeah.
I mean, it seems pretty logical to me. It's like, okay, we let you have the right to personal property. You use that property to kill or injure people, and okay, you no longer get to own property. That's
Yeah. Because like I was thinking about this for a while, like people talking about private property rights and environmental regulations, and it kind of hit me, and I was kind of thinking about this for a couple of days. Like people were talking about private property rights and those environmental regulations, and people. I did meet someone who was like a lukewarm libertarian who said that he would support increasing or even just overall strengthening environmental regulations on the grounds that in the event of, imagine if you and I lived right next door and I
mm-hmm.
was polluting the air and it was harming other people, that my private property rights can be infringed on because I used it to the detriment of other people, like their health
Yes.
or public safety. um, and the weird thing is, it feels like there's probably a few libertarians at my high school when they're either liberals or like Democrats or Republicans, and I even saw the teacher reading Ayn Rand, and I don't know if he's just reading her book or if he subscribes to what she thinks, but that'd be interesting if that's the case.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
But it's pretty. So even if he wasn't agreeing with it, that is pretty unique to have somebody actually give it the time of day, because a lot of people just dismiss it. And I was like, well, that was one of the, like, Atlas Shrugged. Even though I don't agree with Ayn Rand on a lot of things, that book shaped a lot of my thinking. And I don't think I would have my current perspective without reading her writings. So I've read The Fountain and Atlas Shrugged. I haven't read, was it We the Willing or We the Living? I think, yeah, We the Living. I have not read that one, and I've read some of her other essays and stuff like that. But to me, The Fountainhead was pretty boring and lame. It's also really weird. There's a Yeah, there's a section of the story where it's outright rape, and the character involved admits that, and seems to like be okay with it. I didn't understand that at all. Like the character was like, "Yes, I was raped," and I'm like, "Yeah," and it's like to me that was Ayn Rand's, maybe her personal perspective. Anyway, it's
I would hope not,
I
just for the sake of I really don't like the idea that there are people that would even think like that on this planet.
it's like she knew she was raped and she was okay with that, and then went and didn't do anything to the guy who had done that to her, and was actually supporting that guy, and who was one of the main characters. And I'm just like, I think she, yeah, that whole passage. I was like, I'm glad I started off with Atlas Shrugged, because I probably would have gotten to this in the Fountainhead and be like, this lady is crazy. Because I mean, the rest of the book is pretty boring. I mean, for the Fountainhead overall, I don't understand why people was like, oh, this is a great work. No, Atlas Shrugged, however, is amazing. It has amazing speeches in it. I mean, just profound statements and ideas. I mean, all the characters are well thought out. It's like the characters are a bit wooden, and that was a part that didn't get to me. And it's like, oh, okay, they are very like almost robotic in some of their responses and emotionless, but it's on purpose. And once you get into the, you're like, okay, it kind of makes sense. So when you first start reading it, you're just like, these characters are kind of wooden. It kind of reminds you of Star Wars cheesy dialogue and stuff like that. But once you start reading the full thing, you're just like, and it all starts clicking together. You're just like, oh, that's actually brilliant. At least the way the character development is, because the idea is these are the idealistic people, and so, or not idealistic. These are Ayn Rand's versions of what their ideal character types would be, and the reason they're not all emotional and that sort of thing is because the idea is you're supposed to be able to put yourself in their situation and come to the same conclusions and all that sort of thing. So it's got to be purely rational, and separating it from emotion achieves that goal. Anyway, not to get too lost in that, but the fact that somebody would actually be willing to see what she has to say speaks a lot about them, because a lot of people dismiss what she has to say in her writings. But yeah, she's one of the more profound philosophers of the last 100 years or so. So
yeah,
it's to dismiss what she has created and what she's accomplished, considering Atlas Shrugged was like it's right up there with a number of sales worldwide, like with the Bible and books along those lines. It is.
Yeah, I'd say it's not entirely fair to just dismiss it right off the bat. And I did notice a few people, and they're not dumb people. Like, these people are relatively smart where I go to school, and they were wearing "Don't Tread on Me" shirts, and I think one of them did have a little ANCAP flag in his backpack. I saw that, and I'm thinking, this is the first time I've ever seen an ANCAP in real life. I've never seen a communist in real life, although there's several people I wouldn't be shocked if they were.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to sound like a McCarthy when I say that, but...
Well, I supposedly met some communists at the Phyllis Schlafly thing, but they weren't exactly... if they were actual communists, you'd think they would actually support what they stand behind, instead of saying that they were protesting beer. Anyway, okay, so we're getting right around 6:30. Okay, so so tying this all back to the abortion that kind of started this. Okay, so in the situation of abortion, you have the right to liberty and you have the right to pursue happiness, but you all, like, when you get pregnant, you now have a responsibility to that new life that you created. That goes hand in hand. Because, okay, so your actions, here's the I guess let's try to wrap this up in the next 2 minutes here. Okay, so the right to life is the responsibility not to kill somebody else's, which means so you own your actions and everything that comes out of your actions. If you say something that ends up that causes somebody else to die, like you give an order for somebody to shoot somebody else and they do it, well, you are responsible for the part that you played in that. You're responsible for the words that you do, the things that you say. If you drive your car and you run over a pedestrian, well, your actions directly led to their death. You are responsible for that entire chain of events.
Yeah.
If your actions led to the creation of a new life, guess what? You're responsible for that. It's the same line of thinking. It's like every action you take with your life, you are responsible for everything you do. So if you chose to have sex and now you are pregnant because of that, or say, I mean, even if you're on the other side, if you're the guy and you get somebody else is pregnant, guess what? You're responsible for that life, whether you want the responsibility or not. That is the consequence of your actions. In the same way that you got behind a wheel and you weren't expecting to hit somebody, and you drove too fast or whatever, or even if you were driving the speed limit, you were doing everything correctly, and you just didn't see the person crossing the road, you're still responsible for running them over. You are held responsible for those actions because you should have and could have done something to prevent that. Same thing with having sex. You could have done anything to prevent yourself from getting pregnant or from preventing your partner from getting pregnant. You failed to do what was necessary. You are now responsible for that new life. And both parents are responsible for this, and this is something I think society at the moment has gotten terribly wrong, because the man can leave or the woman gets the final say on abortion, which is what we're trying to talk about with Ham, is if the father wants the child and the mother doesn't, the mother gets final say. The mother gets to have the abortion. The dad just has to deal with the consequences, and they have no say whatsoever. That is absolutely barbaric to me. Like, two people participated in this, and only one person gets to make the decision.
Yeah, I don't agree. I've never been able to agree with it. Even with someone who's like pro-choice, like Owen. Me and him ended up having a bit of a sparring thing over that. He's like, "What's the problem?" And I'm like, "It's a problem for a reason."
The problem is both of those people are responsible. So both of them have some say in what happens next. Oh, did you just drop out, or what just happened there?
Huh? Oh, I just muted my mic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So both of those people are responsible. Both of those people are responsible for that new child, which is why exactly. Because they were talking about, woman gets pregnant, she now has a responsibility to the child inside of her, and this person was arguing that they could just get an abortion and that relieves them of all responsibility, which doesn't make any sense to me. But if abortion were illegal, well, then that person would have the responsibility to take that child to term, and after giving birth, the responsibility, if they don't or cannot provide for them, to give them to someone who can, to give that child an environment where they can have a life. It is the responsibility of both people who were involved in the creation of that life to ensure that the baby is provided for. If they fail to do that, they face criminal charges, and this is federally recognized as child neglect. If parents abandon their child and do not ensure that child has a legal guardian, someone who says, yes, I will take care of that child, it's my responsibility now. If the parents fail to establish that, they are responsible for the neglected child. And that is based off of, hey, your actions resulted in this outcome, you are responsible for it. And I think so I think with that line of reasoning, that's a good point to end this, because it's saying you're responsible for everything you do, so you're responsible for all of the consequences of all the actions you take. And we see this in so many. And the current trend is to ignore those responsibilities. Oh, she was drunk, so she's not responsible. What? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't expect to get pregnant, so she's not responsible. What? Doesn't matter what she expected. that's like their expectations don't matter. It's the results of the actions those are the consequences she's responsible for, and she needs to be held to those responsibilities.
Yeah.
So yeah, that line of thinking is what seems to have been eroded, and so hopefully I laid out a good case, and hopefully other people watching this. Let me double check the chat quick before I go, man. And then Jelly Duck 100 says, "Sup everyone." Okay.
Yeah. All right. So
sorry,
yeah,
I wasn't looking at the chat the whole time. And that was on my chat. If anybody on your chat has anything,
let me see. Scrappy says, for a guy to get clipped, the wife has to sign off on it. Dudes are F no matter what in all situations.
Wait,
other
what?
than pump and run. That's
for a guy to get a vasectomy, the wife has to sign off on that? That is insanity.
I'd have to double check that, but if that is true, that is fucking insane. But I think that's a good point to wrap up on. But I hope everyone has a good weekend, and I'll see y'all next time.
See you guys next Friday. All right, bye.
See ya.
Let me actually hit the button to stop.